Party conventions just wrapped up in both Calgary and Edmonton involving the UCP and the NDP. To discuss them in more detail is our political reporter and the Alberta correspondent for the National Post, Tyler Dawson, joining us once again from Edmonton. Tyler, what was the overall tone or theme from Premier Danielle Smith in Edmonton?
Well, the tone from Danielle Smith, I think, and the theme was freedom. She talked sort of a lot about freedom, sort of adjacent things, in addition to really getting on message about some of the other issues that she wants her party to tackle. Now, the convention itself, the theme was definitely unity. In a bit of a funny twist, that was actually kind of the theme last year, but of course, the United Conservative Party was not particularly united at all last year. 6 months, 8 months later, they dumped Premier Jason Kenney and had a leadership race. But there was very much, in everybody I talked to over the course of the weekend, this sense that the party needs to come together. The party needs to line up behind the leader, whether they were, Travis Taves supporters or Rajan Sawhney supporters or Leela Heer supporters. They need to line up behind Danielle Smith if they have a chance at winning the next election. So there was a great deal of enthusiasm in some quarters, certainly the sort of Danielle Smith supporters, the people that didn't like Jason Kenney, a lot of enthusiasm and excitement on that side of that faction, I guess you could say, sort of the old Wild Rose wing of the party. From the sort of more institutional, shall we say, maybe the former PCs, the former Kenney people, a little bit less thrilled, I think would be fair to say. A little bit of caution, a little bit of concern about the party's prospects going into the next election. So quite an interesting dynamic. But at the end of the day, I think it's totally fair to say that unity was sort of the theme over the course of the weekend.
Now, Premier Smith apologized to the unvaccinated whom she said were discriminated against. Now, Smith also made mention that her government will have nothing to do with the World Economic Forum, the WEF. Can you explain?
Sure. So the apology was she had a speech on sort of Saturday afternoon, and then immediately had a press conference after that. Reporters asked her a bunch of questions, both about the World Economic Forum and about the unvaccinated. The question that was put to her is, when will you apologize to the unvaccinated Albertans who lost their jobs? And she said she was happy to do it right then and there, and she did so. And I think it's probably the first time a premier that I'm aware of anyways has offered an apology like that. And she sort of invited back the people who had lost their jobs. Now, I couldn't tell you off the top of my head how many people that is. Certainly in the bureaucracy, there was some reporting about nurses, for example, who were unable to work. So that was sort of the unvaccinated side of things. And then on the World Economic Forum side of things, it was a bit confusing, I have to say, because we'd asked her what she was talking about specifically. She had said that there was AHS, Alberta Health Services, had this agreement with the World Economic Forum, but she couldn't really point to exactly what it is. What it seems to be is a sort of research agreement of sorts, sort of a resource sharing agreement. So, I think it's probably fair to say we're not totally sure what she was talking about. But she did say that the Alberta government would have nothing to do with it. And just a little throwback for the people that were maybe watching politics back in 2014, Smith was actually really harsh with I think it was the Redford government maybe, or the Prentice government at the time, because the WEF was supposed to have a conference in Alberta. And Smith said it was a real black eye for the province that they weren't coming here. And I can't remember exactly why. But lots happening in that press conference for sure. And I think reporters are going to be interested in following up all these things in the weeks ahead.
Now, Premier Smith also says she wants to help Albertans with the high cost of living. So many of us are struggling right now. And that includes potentially lowering the price of gas, as in what, maybe less provincial sales tax on fuel?
Yeah, it's not actually clear yet what the plan is there. So she had this in her keynote address. She sort of had 4 topics on 4 priorities, and sort of the big ones were affordability and inflation, and fuel prices were one of the things that she talked about. And she also talked about putting more money into the pockets of seniors and other vulnerable Albertans. Now, she was a bit thin on the details, which is not totally surprising. Of course, she's only been premier for 2 weeks, I guess it is. So a couple options there, I suppose. One would be to bring back the full fuel tax cut. Of course, it's graded based on oil prices at the moment, so that however many cents it is now, 7 cents, I think, could be taken off. There could be price controls of some sort, I suppose, would be another option, but we're just not sure yet exactly what some of those policy choices might look like.
Tyler, let's chat about some of Premier Smith's cabinet appointments. Lethbridge East MLA Nathan Neudorf becomes the new Minister of Infrastructure and Deputy Premier. Now it's a new post for him, but Smith kept a lot of the key Kenny ministers, including Travis Taves as Finance Minister.
She did. So Travis Taves remains in finance. Adriana LaGrange, who was education, and Sonia Savage, who was energy, are both still in cabinet as well. Two notable people that were removed from cabinet were Jason Nixon, who was a relatively close Kenny ally and was the Environment and Parks Minister, and Rick McIver, sort of long-term Conservative stalwart. So they're both out of cabinet at the moment. What Smith did do, though, was actually bring in a number of her leadership rivals. So, as you mentioned, Travis Taves is back and still in finance. Todd Loewen from sort of the Grand Prairie region is the minister for, the Environment and Parks and Forestry Ministries kind of got broken up and amalgamated. So he has one of those roles. Brian Jean has a Jobs and Northern Development ministerial appointment. It's a big cabinet. It's like 27 people, I think, and then 11, I believe, parliamentary secretaries. So a lot happening there, but certainly some familiar faces, which I think reflects, where some of the experience is in cabinet, and also a sense that they do need a little bit of continuity, especially on some of these really, really important ministries like finance. And someone, Travis Taves has been around in that role for a few years now, so he knows it inside and out.
What's interesting about Todd Loewen is the fact he was sitting as an independent after he was kicked out of caucus from then Premier Jason Kenney. And Drew Barnes is also still sitting as an independent down in Medicine Hat region. What's the latest there?
The latest seems to be that Smith had said that there needs to be some work to sort of rebuild trust before he can be let back into cabinet. It's not super clear to me what that means, but Drew Barnes is still an independent. I think the only remaining independent. There was sort of three of them at one point. Pat Wren was among them, and he had been let back into caucus some months ago now. So the Drew Barnes thing is still a little bit up in the air as far as I'm aware, but certainly Todd Loewen back in caucus and in cabinet. So moving up in the world for Todd Loewen.
Justice Minister Tyler Shandro is facing a disciplinary hearing from the Law Society of Alberta, and it stems back from an incident in which he confronted a doctor in his driveway when he was health minister a few years ago. Can you explain really what transpired?
Sure. So this was sort of during the relatively acrimonious contract negotiations between doctors and Alberta Health, if I remember correctly. And he'd sort of gone over to this driveway, this doctor's driveway, and confronted him about some of this stuff. And the doctor, I guess, felt that this was sort of unbecoming conduct. And there's actually sort of two other allegations that are sort of floating around in the context of this stuff. One of them is that he used his position as Minister of Health to get personal phone numbers for staff and phone them outside of work hours. And the other one is that he sort of allegedly threatened to refer a woman to the authorities with whom he had a disagreement. So basically, the Law Society hearing is simply whether or not sort of he's brought the law profession into disrepute with these actions. And that hearing is going to be in late January. So there's actually a date set for that now. And I believe it had been rescheduled a week or two ago. And so we now know the date of when that's going to be dealt with, I suppose.
Tyler, the UCP is understanding how important it is for Calgary to get a new arena deal done. I mean, the Saddle Dome and all of its charm and character is almost 40 years old now, one of the oldest unrenovated arenas in the NHL. Now, Premier Smith said the province may actually get involved. What will that look like? Maybe extra taxpayers' dollars? What are you hearing?
Yeah, I mean, it could. Pretty thin on the details at the moment, which, as I've sort of said a couple times, we're early days here, so that's not totally surprising. But the government has said, Smith posted a letter to social media on Tuesday, I think it was, basically saying that the government was going to get involved to sort of look at what they can do to make this deal happen. Certainly, one possibility would be some sort of putting up some sort of money to get involved, but we just don't know yet. But big news, I think, for the people of Calgary who had this deal fall apart. Must have been a couple of years ago now. So we'll have to see. But this is, I think, one of the first sort of big moves maybe that Danielle Smith has made, and also notable because in order to win an election, this is taking a bird's eye view here. There's three constituencies in Alberta. You need rural Alberta, or Edmonton, or Calgary. You need two of the three. And at the moment, the UCP has one, and that's rural and small town Alberta. So they need to focus on Edmonton or Calgary, really. And so I think when you look at the arena stuff from the perspective of the electoral politics at play here, I think certainly making some waves in Calgary is going to be part of what we see the UCP do in the months ahead.
You know, and the arena is not just about the Flames, but it's about drawing in, you know, lots of exhibitors and concerts and stuff. In fact, the first big concert I ever attended was 1985, Tears for Fears. That's a lot.
There you go.
That's older than you are, I bet, right?
I'm afraid to say it is, yeah.
There you go. Tyler, opposition leader Rachel Notley and the NDP held their convention in Calgary recently. What was the main theme there? I mean, they were acting kind of like a government in waiting.
I think it's fair to say that probably is the NDP's theme at the moment. You know, they are trying to put themselves in a position where people look at them as the next government and also are not particularly scared of them. You know, Rachel Notley in her speech had sort of suggested that Smith was, you know, fear mongering about NDP socialism and stuff like that. But they're, you know, trying to provide, you know, a relatively mainstream, viable alternative to the United Conservatives. And so I think that it's fair to say that that's sort of the theme, that they are trying to project themselves as the government in waiting, the party of stability that does not have infighting, that will be focused on Albertans instead of infighting. That's sort of the message they've been hammering for some months now. And I think we're going to see that sort of continue in the weeks and months ahead. You know, notable that the UCP convention was in Edmonton and the NDP convention was in Calgary. And I think this, you know, it has to do with the fact that the conventions have been flipped in years past. But also, again, this is an electoral politics thing. Both those parties need to think about how they're going to win the parts of Calgary that they need to in order to form a government in 6 months, 7 months' time.
Yeah, try and build up support. UCP in Edmonton, NDP in Calgary, absolutely. Tyler, the NDP adopted some notable policies, including lowering the voting age in Alberta to 16. Why do you think they're pushing for that? Are they thinking, you know what, if I'm old enough to drive a vehicle at 16, why not vote?
Yeah, I think that's certainly part of it. You know, this debate has gone on at the federal level a little bit in the last year or so, and I mean, it hasn't gone anywhere. But I think from the NDP perspective, there's some sort of electoral genius there. You know, when you look, it's sort of the old aphorism, you know, that if you're not a liberal when you're 20, you have no heart, and if you're not a conservative by 50, you have no brain, or whatever the specifics of it is. But I think probably the New Democrats are looking at some of the concerns of younger Albertans and some of the things that they are worried about, and you know, education, for example, student loans, housing prices, those sorts of things. And I'm thinking, well, you know what, gosh, there's probably some electoral benefit to having 16-year-olds voting. I mean, there's also a principled argument for it, but that was certainly one of the things that made a bit of a splash coming out of the NDP convention.
Premier Smith is planning on running in a by-election in Brooks Medicine Hat next month. After all, she needs a seat at the legislature. Now she's going up against Alberta Party leader Barry Morishita and the NDP's Gwendolyn Dirk. Morishita is the former Brooks mayor.
Yeah, so that is actually an interesting dynamic. You know, this is probably a relatively safe spot for Danielle Smith to be running, certainly compared to the other option that was before her, which is the riding of Calgary Elbow. But she's running against someone who's pretty well known in the area. And she's running, and Barry Morishita, of course, the Alberta Party, is not a super left-wing party, you know, running to the left of Danielle Smith, certainly, and the UCP, certainly, but not a New Democrat. So do I think Danielle Smith's going to lose? No, I don't. I think she'll probably take her seat in the legislature. But you know, it does suggest that this is not necessarily going to be a cakewalk for her. And I think it's going to be really interesting to watch how she tries to appeal to those voters when she has a really viable candidate who's not the New Democrat. And you could see some vote splitting. You know, you could see some vote splitting between the NDP and the Alberta Party, or the UCP and the Alberta Party. So it'll be an interesting one to watch, especially because I know I'm rambling on here, but of course she doesn't live in Brooks Medicine Hat. So she's out on doorsteps, meeting people, introducing herself. So it's going to be quite interesting to watch that unfold, I think.
So what's going to happen with Calgary Elbow, that riding specifically? Will it remain vacant leading up to the next provincial election in May?
That does seem to be the plan. You know, the NDP is making a lot of noise about this too, saying that, you know, the people of Calgary Elbow are not going to have a representative for the next 7 months. And the UCP has basically said, you know, the grassroots want to have a proper sort of candidate vetting nomination process to get a candidate for that riding, instead of just, say, nominating someone to run or something like that. But the NDP is not happy about it, and you have to wonder how happy some of the Calgary Elbow voters are about it. And you know, the outcome of that, of course, is going to be in the election in 7 months' time. By end of May 29th, I think.
That was Schweitzer's old riding too, wasn't it?
Yes, I believe so. So it was a UCP riding. So, you know, there is the risk, of course, that this flips that riding for the New Democrats. So it's, you know, people always talk about by-elections and things as like a bellwether, you know, and whether that's true or not is maybe beside the point. But this certainly feels like one of those ridings to keep an eye on over the next few months.
Absolutely. Political reporter and the Alberta correspondent for the National Post, Tyler Dawson, thanks so much for joining us today from Edmonton.
Always a pleasure, Hal.